Okay. You guys should be able to see my screen now, right?
Yep.
All right. For first things first, I want to say thank you to everybody who's helped me put this together. This was actually a sort of a collaboration effort amongst a bunch of us. So, and then, of course, a lot of just writing. And this is going to be basically my basic water talk. So first rules here, why do we worry about our water? Water does make up about 95% of our beer, unless you're somebody like Beanie or maybe Craig Chaplin, who, then at least it's still 85% for those people who like to make super strong beer. So it's important for us to get the base to work for us. Now, I will say, you do not have to actually worry about water in the short term. A lot of people can make really great beer without worrying about water, and getting involved in the middle of the chemistry. But worrying about your water is, I think, one of the keys to getting from good beer to great beer, right? To me, the most important thing you ever have to worry about with making beer is your yeast, and making sure that you have healthy yeast and healthy fermentation. Water is right behind that. Okay, so once you get your fermentation locked, you get your yeast locked, then you can start worrying about your water. Okay? So, come on. I've lost my cursor. There it is. So these are my rules about water. If you do nothing else, remove the chlorine and chloramine from your water. Every bit of water that we have that comes out of the faucet is going to have some sort of sanitizer in it, unless, of course, you're on a well. But you need to remove that, because that is probably arguably the #1 bad flavor that I get in homebrew. Number 2, know your water profile, at least roughly. Do the least that you need to do. I see some people out there who go whole hog on trying to add every water salt known to mankind to their beer, and it's not really a necessary thing, and actually it's somewhat detrimental. Okay, and then the last one is stop stressing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And by the way, feel free, if you have any questions, stop me, ask. Okay. Typical water sources that we have, at least here in LA, we get most of our water from the Metropolitan Water District. It's pretty decent water. It does vary over the year as we get different sources, and it also varies from region to region in LA. So, for instance, Ogopogo Brewing Company is 3.5 miles away from me, and they have a slightly different blend to their water, so their water profile looks different than mine, even though they're only 3.5 miles apart, right? So you do want to be aware of that. It does vary. The other problem with the tap water that we get is that it is treated with chloramine. I'll get into what that is in a moment. Other possible water sources that you got: reverse osmosis, using machines and membranes and multi-stage filters in order to remove more of your salts. It's really good, but the home units do require pre-planning and maintenance, because anybody who's had an RO system knows, you don't just turn on the tap and get all your water out in a heartbeat, right? It takes time to gather up the amount of water that you need for brewing. So you do have to worry about that. You do also have to worry about whether or not your filters and your system is in good shape. All right. You can also buy RO water, which is fine, and that's good for occasional needs. And we'll get into sometimes when you want to do that. And the last major type is distilled. And so distilled to me is like RO, except for it's even more neutral. So RO will allow some mineral load to come through, at least in most systems. But distilled water is, barring somebody screwing something up in the downstream, distilled water is basically clear. And then the problem is, of course, we're all going to need to buy it, right? So that's the reason why I don't like to worry about distilled water. It doesn't provide me much use. Okay?
Oh.
All right. So somehow this is very...
Nana's not here, honey. This is something else.
Put yourself on mute there, please.
Yeah, so now I want to get into what I think is a very important and timely topic, given pandemics and crises that we're experiencing. Just a brief interlude on sanitation, or as I like to think about it, how we realize that water is some really deadly shit. So that there is Dr. John Snow, and that is a John Snow who actually did know something. John Snow in the 1840s theorized that disease was actually caused by something in the water. At that time, the popular theory was that it was caused by miasmas, or basically unhealthy air. And in the 1840s, he was laughed. He was made fun of. They didn't believe him. They thought he was wrong. In 1854, he proved his theory because he managed to stop a cholera outbreak that was happening in the east of London by tracking it down to a single well, a single pump, and removing the handle from that pump. And he did. And what it turned out to be was that there was a break in the wall of the well that was allowing shit to get into the water, and therefore bacteria. And so that's how we actually figured out how to stop a pandemic before it could go. And the fact that there was something out there, not miasma, but actually some sort of germ that was out there causing it. So John Snow's the source of germ theory. He's also the reason why we have sanitized water. That's also the reason why you can pour stuff out of your tap and not die. Okay. Here's what we use. Today, there are two real main solutions. Chlorine, right, which is the older of the two. Kills everything, but it's very unstable. So you used to be able to, if your system was running on chlorine, you just put water into your boil kettle overnight and let it sit there. Or if you were in more of a hurry, put it into your kettle and boil it. And all that chlorine would come out of solution. Problem is that instability is not very good for major water systems like ours, where think about how many miles of pipes there are here in California, to feed water to everybody. So that led to the use of a compound called chloramine, which is essentially chlorine mixed with an ammonia molecule. It's very, very stable. It does just as good of a job in terms of sanitation as chlorine. It's also very hard for us to remove, okay? But this is what we deal with as brewers here in Southern California, all right? And actually, almost any major city nowadays is going to be using chloramine. So sanitation is good for our water, but the chlorophenols that are formed are bad. So if you've ever had homebrew, and I swear this is the most common off flavor I get in people's homebrew when they bring it to me, if you ever have it where it has a plasticky, band-aidy, smoky type flavor, odds are it's either from contamination or it's a chlorophenol. And if you like it, you probably like Scotch. If you don't like Scotch, then you probably don't like this flavor. And I certainly don't like it in my beer. So we have to make sure that we remove the chlorophenol. Chlorine, as I said earlier, is easy. Chloramine does require more work. And I know a lot of people out there use the activated charcoal filters. But you have to make sure your charcoal filter is in good shape, and you have to make sure you're running slow enough. So what I actually depend upon instead is potassium metabisulfite, which I know this looks like a bag of cocaine or something, but no, it's potassium metabisulfite, also known as Campton. So here I'll show you a little demonstration here. It's going to be a little tricky over the Zoom. What I have here is I have some total chlorine strips, and this will show you both bound and free chlorine. These are available from Vermont, and I bought these off of Amazon, and they're really easy. I have here a glass of LA water, just poured straight out of my tap. Just dunk that in there, give it a shake, and then within a couple of seconds, you can start to read it. And you can see we're actually not that bad right now. Yeah, there's just a little bit of chlorine in here. You can see that green in the bottom, right? On this bottom cube, a little bit green. The other trick about the water systems is they will routinely go through flushes, where suddenly, if you've ever noticed that one morning you open up your tap in the kitchen and it smells like, like bleach, that's because the water system's doing a flush. And so when that happens, voila, you'll notice your total chlorine goes up. All right, now I have a little pinch of potassium metabisulfite here, right? Very tiny little pinch. This is actually overkill for this amount of water. All I'm going to do is sprinkle it in, give it a stir, chugga. We'll let that sit for a second. Now, the reason why I like to do this, you can see on the screen, I've shared some statistics. These are from Martin Brungard, who is a professional water engineer. If you're using a carbon filter or an RO filter to remove chlorine, you're restricted to a flow of 1 gallon per minute max in order to actively strip the chlorine. If, on the other hand, you have chloramine, you're restricted to 1/10 of that. You're restricted to 0.1 gallons per minute if you actually want to successfully remove the chloramine. And that's assuming that your filter's in good shape. And just as a reference, when you turn on the spigot for your garden hose and you turn that open, that's 5 gallons per minute. All right. And this is also my other note. Don't use a green garden hose, please, because you don't want those flavors. All right. So same glass of water. This has now been treated. If we do that, give it a quick shake. You can see no real reaction, right? There's just a tiny faint little bit of green there, but no real reaction. You can actually see like the difference here. All right, this one's a little darker. So the Campton's actually removed the chloramine just like that. So this is what I do at home. I literally, in order to do my brew day, I have a spigot with a white water hose. This is one of the RV potable water hoses. And I pour that straight into the kettle. I hit it with the Campton, stir it, come back, and I'm ready to go.
How much do you hit it with, Drew? How much of that do you use?
Yeah, so the easiest way for most people to think about it is you usually will find Campton sold in tablet form, right? And one of those tablets is good for 20 gallons of water, right? And Campton, by the way, is mostly used as a wine sanitizer. So if you've made wine or you've made mead and done sulfiting for your mead or cider, then you already have the parts on hand. So for most of what we would need to do is like say 5 gallon brewers, you'd need like a half a tablet, to treat your sparge water and your mash water, right?
So can you OD this Camden OD? Can you use too much?
You can, but boy, you got to be trying.
So if you use one tab because you're lazy for 20 gallons, but you use it on a 10 gallon batch, 14 gallon batch, it's going to be okay, correct?
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, the worst thing that happens with Campton usually is, all right, so if you add too much potassium, that can be a problem, but you'd really have to try to do that. If you add too much sodium, if you're using sodium metabisulfite, we'll talk a little bit more about sodium in a minute. That can also cause issues, but you really got to really be driving it in order to try and get that done. Okay. All right. So water reports, I told you it's important for you to know your profile. I never trust a recipe that just blindly adds water salts, at least not for my area, right? I know I can usually assume at least, hopefully, that if I got a recipe from somebody like say Craig, and he gave me his triple IPA recipe and it said, use X teaspoons of gypsum in it, I know that works for Craig's water, right? But that doesn't tell me how that works for me. So to my mind, you have to understand where you're starting from roughly. The easiest way to do it, your water district does a report every year. It's federally mandated. So you can find it online. I've put the link for the DWP's water report. It does get updated usually about a year in arrears. The only problem is that's an average for the region, an average for the water district. You don't really know what's coming out of your tap that way, but it can at least be a good enough way to get started. Better, you can go and get yourself a home kit, and you can test a lot. And give me 1 second. We did this for a while at the shop. This is a Lamont Brew Lab Plus water kit, and it contains a bunch of testing jars and reagents and other sorts of fun stuff. And the nice thing is that you can actually use this kit and do multiple tests. It's like a fancier version of your pool testing kit or aquarium testing kit. But the problem is you're still depending upon what you can do with that. The gold standard, by far and away, and the one that I suggest everybody do at least once, is Ward Labs, right? And Ward Lab has a test. They change the numbers on them all the time. Don't ask me why. But the test is currently called the W501 Brewer's Test. And it basically tells you everything you need to know about your water. Now, the trick is, and the thing I need to do this year is I actually need to update my profile because I'm still running a couple years back. I was talking with Jason over at Ogopogo the other day, and he does a water report via Ward Labs every month, right? If you remember listening to old Brewing Network shows, Colin Kaminsky talked about he would test his water ahead of every brew using something very much like the Lamont kit there. But, that's a little nuts.
I want to talk about that. There was Kelsey McNair down here at North Park Beer Co.
Yep.
He did a presentation on water, and he actually took, I think every month for 2 years or something, he took water samples, and it's Alvarado source down here in San Diego, but the range of, parts per million of all the compounds that you need for water salts, it was all over the map, and he actually charted it out and showed that the change is the only constant when it comes to Southern California water.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you think about it. We don't have enough water here for everybody that we've got, so we're taking water from all over the place, and then it gets blended together. If you look at the LADWP report, right? They talk about, okay, hey, we get this much water from the MWD for this area, plus local wells, plus some Colorado River water, plus this, that, and the other. Yeah, it comes from all over the place. I want to do something very similar to what Kelsey did with at least my area, so I can understand. But yeah, this is the reason why you don't have to be perfect about this, but you at least get a good idea of where you're starting from, right? So as some examples, this is the MWD report for the Valley. And it varies all over the year, all over the city. If you actually go and look at the DWP report, it will tell you, hey, they're all, I think LA has 8 sources of water, and they're all blended in different portions for different parts of the county, right? Also, I really love those aqueduct falls.
Hey, Drew,
Yep.
question, does last mile, forget about the water source for a second, does the last mile, local pipes, your home pipes, can that affect it in any way?
Sure.
I think
Depends
so,
on what your pipes are made of.
What's that?
Yeah, absolutely. The last mile can do a lot of weird stuff to your water. That's part of the reason why I don't really like basing what I'm going to do just off the DWP report. I really do like to know what I've got in my area, and ideally, what I got coming out of this thing, right? Because if I know that, I can at least be sure something's happening in the color, right?
Drew, just to case in point, San Fernando Valley basically has 3 different water sources, and 2 of them are pretty similar, but one of them tends to be slightly different. And the report doesn't tell you when you get what source. And so basically the only way, if you depend entirely on the report, the only way you can come up with something is by averaging these 3, all the numbers together, basically.
Yeah. Hey, Oleg, thank you, Oleg. I just saw that in the chat. So 0.44 grams for each Campton tablet, right?
Drew, I got a question. As far as even if we get the individual tests, since the water is always blended, aren't we sort of concerned that the profile changes every so? I mean, so then how often do you do that test?
Well, I mean, as Brian pointed out, Kelsey did it every month. Ogopogo does it every month. I'm probably going to at least try to get one every quarter, because a lot of our water changes are seasonal.
Yeah.
So, like for instance, coming up here as we get into late spring and early summer, we're going to start having a lot of soft Sierra water come in, right?
Hey, some people say that the water changes even during the course of the day.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, look, it's LA. It's a giant ass city. I mean,
how long does it take for those tests to come back from that?
Usually with Ward Lab, they're pretty damn quick. I mean, once they get the sample from you, and they're located in Nebraska or Iowa, somewhere in the Midwest. Did somebody just say? Okay. But Ward Labs is they're pretty Johnny on the spot. And once they get your sample analyzed, and it's usually from the time they get it, like 2 or 3 days, they have a report online that you can then go download.
That's
so
cool.
It beats where you used to have to wait for it to get mailed back to you. So it's very nice. All right. So here, for example, is something that I did from Ward Lab. I did this a little while ago, and this was December, right? So December is going to be no snow melt. So this is going to be some of the hardest water that we see. And you can tell, like, in there, overall, it's pretty nominal water. It's mostly going to be good for amberish beers without much adjustment. But the only real problem I have with it is my sodium's a bit high. And so the only way I'm going to make a Pilsner out of this, though, is also via dilution. And as I said, this varies because Ogopogo, which is 3.5 miles from me that way, their bicarbonate is, or their total hardness is much lower than mine, and their sodium is also lower, and even their chloride levels are lower than mine. So it's a little weird and different. Okay, and then John Aitchison, and I don't know if John made it on the call today, but John gave me this as his report. This is if you're looking at the DWP stuff and you're just looking for, say, Owens Valley, which is a major source for the valley, then this is what you'd see, right? And you can tell all this stuff is basically in the same, our same area, and it's varying in different ways around as we move. And as we said, it's going to vary across the year, across the day, across the month, across the phase of the moon, right? So let's talk about the minerals that we're looking at here. We've got calcium, which is a very important brewing salt, creates hardness in the water. It's important for our yeast health, our flocculation, and our mash efficiency. It does lower the pH, but don't depend upon it for lowering the pH. Use acid for that. And the minimum range is about 40 ppm. You need at least 40 ppm to have everything happen in the mash in the most efficient way. Okay. Magnesium, also another component to hardness. Important for yeast health, but man, unless you have really magnesium deficient water, you really don't need to go do that, right? I know some people like to use Epsom salts to boost their sulfate level, but you got to be really careful because a little bit of magnesium goes a long way, and too much of it creates hard water. And for everybody out there who's saying, hey, RO water, remember, yeah, you either got to buy it, and those cheap RO systems are not worth it. You can test the water that comes out of a cheap RO system, and you'll find that you still have a heavy mineral load. Sodium, it's another great one. We love our salt here in America, and it does enhance the flavor, but a little bit goes a very long way. And if you have too much of it, it will be very, very harsh, right? I tend to keep my sodium levels somewhere around 70 or below. And you saw my default water profile is already starting me at 51. So I really don't have much room to play any adjustments on sodium. We have sulfate, which again, for American hop-loving beer aficionados, is probably our favorite. It increases the apparent dryness of a beer, right? So everybody talks that, sulfate boosts the hop character. It's not really doing that. It's doing it via an indirect effect. What it actually does is it changes your perception of the malt. And because it sort of dampens down the malt character, allows the hops to shine up better, right? So the ideal range, you'll see 0 to 350. Really don't push that upper end unless you're trying to do like a Burton IPA. I usually find like 150, 200 is about the most I like. Again, that's my philosophy of like doing the least that you need to do. Chloride, it's the other side, right? So if sulfate is yin, chloride is yang. It's a negative ion of chlorine. It increases the apparent fullness and promotion of the malt, right? So if sulfate dries that back end of the beer out, chloride bumps it up. And this is what you go. Yeah, sodium and goes. You have to be really careful with it. I can't tell you how many times I've had a super over salty goes, and the difference is about that much. Bicarbonate. It's our primary or alkaline buffer. We need to use either acid or dark malts to overcome it, and that's part of the reason why you saw things like London becoming so famous for dark beers like porter. It's because their water was heavily bicarbonate. All right, now what we're changing when we add acids and salts, we're changing pH, right? So the measure of hydrogen ions in solution, 0 to 7 is acidic, 7 is neutral, 7 to 14 is basic. We do not ever care about your water pH, right? I mean, you care about your sparge pH, but you do not care about your water pH. What you're actually really caring about is your mash pH. And so you want your mash pH to be somewhere between 5.2 and 5.5. You do want to measure your pH at room temperature. If you have a pH meter, that's great. Two other notes I will tell you. Do not think of pH as being a measure of how sour something is going to taste. I see way too many brewers out there going, oh, look, I made a kettle sour, and the kettle sour came in at 3.2 pH. Hey, it's super sour. It's not. That's not a reliable gauge. It's a super easy measurement to do. If you want to actually get a notion of how sour something is, the right way to do it is what they call a TA, or titratable acidity. which is a big thing for winemakers. Winemakers will do this all the time. So one of these days we'll get Dave Lustig to give you guys a lesson on PA. Okay?
Hey, Drew, when you talk about the pH for a second, if you have too low a pH, though, if you go down to the low 3s, for some reason, I don't know why you would.
Oh, it's a bitch for your yeast.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, wine yeast are adapted for lower pHs, but yeah, beer yeast don't really like super low pHs, which is the reason why you see a lot of these people making these kettle sours that have fermentation health issues. Right. All right, calcium sulfate, that's the gypsum that we all love. 1 gram per gallon gives you about 150 parts per million, right, in your beer. You can use it to adjust the calcium levels, but really what we're all using it for is hop bitterness. Hardness, it's a measure of concentration of calcium and magnesium. Temporary hardness, it can be precipitated via the boil. Permanent hardness is what gets bound up with everything else. And a very important lesson, something I learned from John Palmer, is you can still brew with hard water. You just got to play more games. Alkalinity, it's the measure of how much buffering capacity our water has. So if you think of pH as the hydrogen ions, alkalinity is hydrogen carbonate, right? So the real thing about alkalinity is it's how resistant your beer or your water is to lowering that pH, right? So and it's different than being basic. Okay, now this is the weird one for what we do. It's a brewing specific thing called residual alkalinity, and it was developed over the years. But basically, it's how much buffering power does your water have after you've hit it with malt, right? Because when you hit it with malt, what will happen is calcium and magnesium will interact with phosphates that are in the malt, and they're basically making an acid. And what you really need to do, and the reason why RA is important, is if you have too high carbonate water, you got to figure out how to get your RA down, right? So that's a unique one for us. And of course, mineral content is the other thing that we're going to adjust, and that's because we're adding all these flavoring impacts. So I do recommend, again, that you treat them like salt. You can put salt, you can put more salt in later. You cannot remove salt. All right, so treat all these mineral additions that you're going to do as if though you're seasoning something, because you are. Okay. All right, how we change the salts. All of these. Oh, I screwed up. That sulfate chart should have been over here. Yeah. Oh well. You do have to be aware that minerals come in different varieties, and if you use 5.2 from 5-star, I'm going to give you disapproving looks. All right, everybody wants an easy solution for this. Don't do it. 5-star is basically a buffering agent, and it adds weird flavors, in my opinion. So learn how to do. Okay. So calcium chloride, as I said, this is the yin to gypsum gin. Get about 169 parts per million of chloride per gallon or per gram per gallon. And again, use that to adjust your calcium levels and also make beer for fuller. If you've seen the big debate about New England IPAs, for instance, is it chloride centric or is it sulfate centric, right? And so a lot of people want to push New England IPAs to be very chloride centric, and push West Coast IPAs to be very sulfite centric, or sulfite. Sodium chloride. Somebody was asking about salt earlier. 1 gram per gallon is 104 parts per million. So one gram per gallon is too much in my mind. So the other thing I will also tell you, I mean, I know kosher salt has become very popular in the past decade or so. So hopefully this is less of a problem. But don't use iodized salt, please. Iodized salt will make your beer taste weird. Okay. Magnesium sulfate, this is the Epsom salt. Again, you can see it gives a good amount of sulfate, but it also gives a fairly large amount of magnesium, and I really don't like it. So I know there are some traditional recipes in there that will use it, particularly for, like, say, I'm going to make a classical British IPA. Be careful, please. Calcium carbonate, this is chalk. Everybody loves to use chalk, or it has in the past, because it gives you a big boost of bicarbonate. And the problem is it does not like to dissolve in brewing water. So the way that you actually, if you talk to folks like Martin about how you get chalk to actually dissolve in some place, you need to actually expose it to CO2 pressure. So you put it in a 2-liter bottle, a little bit of water, put your chalk in there, put one of your carbonary caps on there, and hit it with CO2 and shake it, and then it will dissolve. In general, my recommendation is skip it and instead use calcium hydroxide, which is pickling lime or slaked lime. It gives you more bicarbonate. It dissolves easily, and it allows you to get that alkalinity to take off the edge of your roasted malts. But you do have to be very careful because it is very, very, very powerful. Okay. Sodium bicarbonate, baking soda. Again, you get a lot of bicarbonate out of it, but you also get a shit ton of sodium, and I hate it. Right, so I don't like to use baking soda. It was used fairly heavily traditionally, mostly because it was an easy source of bicarbonate for people to find before brew shops existed. So I tend not to use it ever, except for if I'm going to make a kid's volcano. Acids, I got a couple. Lactic acid is the common one. It's very reliable. It's relatively safe. It is one of the weaker acids that we use. If you have to use too much of it, like if you have a lot of bicarbonate, if you have to use too much of it, you can actually start to detect the taste of it. It makes your beer kind of taste tangy, a little bit yogurty. So be careful when you use that. I had to throw this in here because John Aitchison would give me crap otherwise. If you want to be if you want to be that compliant, you can use acidulated malt, or you can perform a acid rest in the mash to create lactic acid in real time. However, just use lactic acid. It's far easier. The other one that people use a lot of times in brewing is phosphoric acid. It's a very powerful acid that requires very little to push through. So if you have a lot of residual alkalinity and you don't want a flavor impact from lactic acid, then you can use phosphoric acid, and it's become very, very popular, right? There are other acids that are out there, obviously sulfuric and hydrochloric. Homebrewers do not tend to use those because those will actually eat your hands. So don't use those, because I know you guys, you drink while you're making beer, and acid safety requires sobriety. So don't. There are other acids that you can use, obviously, like acetic, citric, malic, tartaric, but they're too weak for our general purposes and they add too much flavor, right? So you'll see all those, well, except for acetic and like wine and cider and mead, for making flavor adjustments, but never for mash chemistry adjustments, okay? All right, so choosing what to change. As I said, no matter what, clear your water of the chlorine and chloramine, get your mash into the 5.2, range, or 5.2, 5.6 range. You might be using acid, watch the RA number, and you need to get your mash calcium to at least 40 ppm, all right? Now, one trick, if you're like doing a Pilsner, and you don't want a large load of calcium in the finished beer, what I've seen people do is they'll actually calcify the mash water, so they have their 40 parts per million, and then they'll turn around and not do anything to their sparge water except for acidify it, so the calcium level drops in the finished beer, right? You can choose to use beer history, so we all know the stories, lots of historical brewing styles tied to cities. I just talked about London, we talked about Burton upon Trent. We have tables for sort of generic city profiles. I don't like them because I don't know when they were drawn from, what the averages were based on, what the brewers ever did to their water, right? I mean, a lot of places with high bicarbonate water, they boiled their water before they made beer. So I don't recommend this approach, except for generally as general guidance, like, oh yeah, if you want to make an IPA, more sulfate. If you want to make a porter, you need more bicarbonate. Don't depend upon those tables. At least in my mind, I think those tables are full of shit, right? If you want a classic example, go look at like the tables that you see for Edinburgh. Edinburgh varies even more wildly than LA does. Yeah, and Brian, you're right. Do not make city water. You can do by numbers. So one very popular thing that a lot of brewers will do nowadays is they'll worry about their chloride sulfate ratio. So again, more chloride's maltier, more sulfate's more bitter. And so you'll see numbers tossed around for different ideas for how much of those two salts you should have, right? I was talking, like I said, I talked to the folks at Ogopogo. For their New England IPA, they actually end up with something like a 3-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio in order to get their Charlie to be, sort of very full-bodied. The big thing, though, is you got to pay attention to the numbers. You can't just pay attention to the ratio, because 300 grams or 300 parts per million of chloride and 150 parts per million of sulfate tastes a lot different than 150 and 75, even though it's the same ratio. Okay. The other thing I will also say, even if you're going to do something like the city tables, don't obsess with trying to get your numbers directly perfect, right? We're not doing lab grade science here. And also you won't be able to taste the difference. By flavor intent. So this is another strategy. Picture what you want to taste, adjust based on that. A lot of brewers, and some of the examples I'm going to give you guys in a second, have sort of default profiles that they always use. And it's very easy to do that once you know what your water is doing, right? And so, like, for example, the hoppy beers boost the sulfate, malty beers boost chloride, pale beers dilute with RO. And then finally, by color and taste. This is a bit of refinement. Anybody out there who's used brewing water has seen this in there. And it's actually how I do a lot of my stuff now. And instead of thinking of style and flavor, think about what the color of the beer is, because that's going to impact your residual alkalinity, right? You know, the darker malts are acidic, so you need more alkalinity if you're going to go darker. So you think of color, and then you think of what balance you want. Do you want the beer to be full? Do you want it to be balanced, or do you want it to be dry? And that way, instead of fucking around with the theoretical city profiles, you now have a guide to just basically do, oh, hey, you know, this is going to be a beer that's going to be pale, and I want it to be really bitter, so I'll go yellow dry, right? So a very easy way to think. I kind of like it. Now, give me 1 second. That's too much talking without me having anything to drink. All right, so math is hard. You guys know I'm a computer guy, so I like to use my computers to do things. Talk about a couple of them. So big thing to know is that if you go between tools like say Beersmith and Brewing Water or John Palmer's water apps, you'll notice that everybody gives you something different out the other side, and that's because as much as we know about chemistry, water models are still sort of funny. They're still sort of magic. And so there are lots of different models out there because frankly, the chemistry for water is gnarly. So there are no right answers, but I do think some of the answers are better. And I know we still have people out there who use ProMash. Don't use the ProMash water model, okay? It's old and antique, and I love Jeffrey, and I wish he could still have updated the program. It's a good program. Cheers. All right, so Beersmith. It does have an updated water model. It's still not the most sophisticated one out there. It does have a water profile tool, and what's actually kind of cool about it that it does is it has a fit function. So you push a single button, and you get a final graph. And I don't know if let me pull up Beersmith here real quick. And let me give me 1 second. I'm gonna share Beersmith with you guys. How are we doing so far? Is everybody enjoying this? I mean, otherwise I'm gonna drive you guys insane, I think.
Keep going, it's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. This is really great.
Yeah. All right, so here's Beersmith.
It's terrible, Drew.
Yeah, fuck off. All right.
Would you open a Coors Light, Drew? I heard that pop in that can before. Coors Light?
Nope. That's the Ogopogo Charlie's Hazy IPA. I do, however, have a Coors Banquet in the fridge.
Sure.
Yeah, the one advantage of being the Grand Hydrometer is that when I come home after the club meeting, I still have the other beer that wasn't drunk by everybody. So that means I've been having to suffer my way through some Paps and some Coors Light recently. Or not Coors Light, Coors Banquet. So here in Beersmith, one of the things that you can do is you can actually come in and you can set up your water profile, right? And so I've put in a Pasadena water profile here, and I've saved it now. And then when I say, hey, you know, I want to choose a particular target profile, right? So this was an IPA test that I set up. So I chose a Burton-on-Trent water profile. Remember what I said? I don't like city profiles, but this is one of the things that Beersmith will do, right? And you can set up other target profiles, but by default it thinks in terms of, oh, you want London water. I don't like that. But what's cool is that once you know your own water, And then once you've chosen a style, you can say match target profile, and it will tell you what to add, right? And so you can see on here, it's telling me, okay, for your IPA, add 3.3 grams of gypsum, 1.6 grams of Epsom salt, and then 0.2 grams of baking soda and chalk. You will notice that there are a couple things in here that I don't do and I don't like. So I don't use the Beersmith water profile. It does work, but it's not my favorite thing. Okay, but again, the water entry. I mean, the nice thing about it is the water entry is relatively easy, right? You can come in and you can say, create a new one and just enter in your parts. The thing I don't like is that with Beersmith, at least as far as I can tell, what you have to do is, start with your base water profile and then save it out as a new water profile and attach that to the recipe, right? So, and that's the reason why you can see in here, here, it's Pasadena IPA water, right? Yeah, and again, not a fan of using Epsom salt, not a fan of using chalk, right? So it's still a working program, and it does you better than not doing something, right? And it does you better than having to guess. Okay. There are other calculators out there, and hold on, back to the share. There we go. Wait. Yep. So that's Beersmith. It is relatively easy to use, but it's not my favorite tool for this.
Drew, was that Beersmith 2 or 3?
That was 2, I think.
They've updated all the water profile stuff for version 3.
Yeah, let me. Yeah, it's still 2. All right, Palmer. Obviously, John Palmer flies around the world talking about water. Wrote a whole book on it. If you ever need help falling asleep, it's a perfectly good solution for sleeping. It's a very dense book with a lot of chemistry in it. It's actually a lot of good knowledge. It's just hard to get through. But Palmer does have apps and a spreadsheet, and he has an app that's designed for your phone. I'd share it to you, but I don't have the right cable here. But basically, with Palmer's app, because Palmer's very RA centric, that's all of his stuff that he talks about. His actually allows you or sets you up to say, okay, give me your style, give me your water, and then choose what your alkalinity is, what you want your residual alkalinity to be, and then I'll tell you the salts and acids, right? It's pretty straightforward, but it does think very much like John does, which again, John's a water whiz, so you can think of it that way. But speaking of water whizzes, my favorite water whiz is Bruin Water, and that's Martin Brungard. To my mind, this is the best water model that is on the market, by far and away. He keeps it constantly updated. He is a professional water engineer. So as opposed to somebody like me who's talking out of his ass, Martin knows what he's talking about. And I highly depend upon him. And he was one of the guys I had review this. Yeah, Nick is right. If you ever have questions, Martin will answer them. I did a whole episode of the podcast because this is very intimidating to set up. So I did a whole episode on the podcast, and I interviewed him. And the real secret was I had him help me set up brewing water during the podcast. Andy, it is very, very focused. So the nice thing with using a tool like Beersmith is Beersmith will allow you to do everything in one sort of interface, right? And much like a jack of all trades, that's good, but it's more generalistic in its water model, and I don't find it to be as accurate. So this is just literally one of the gnarliest Excel spreadsheets you've ever seen in your entire life. He has a free version on his site, but he also has a paid version, and the paid version is literally $10. And for $10, you get, I think, what is the best water tool out there. And I will show you. When I'm doing this, when I do a brew day, I make sure that I do my recipe, and then I go and I grab brewing water, and I make sure that my baseline assumptions are correct, right? So here you go. I will warn you, if you are not an engineer, this should terrify the crap out of you. All right, and this is brewing water, and this is the professional version. This is the paid version. But you can see, you know, here on the spreadsheet, you come. I know it's going to be hard to see it because of the screen size. Let me try and change that. There we go. Ta-da. That should be better. All right. You can see you come in and you report in all your salts, just like every water tool out there will do. They'll have you report in your salts. And then it does a bunch of, he's got a bunch of different things in here to do different corrections. He's also showing you like, hey, you know, here's other things that we've calculated. You know, just to give you a lot of information. You come in, the second tab is about how you acidify your sparge water. All right. What's your starting alkalinity? That came in from the other area. You know, how much dilution are you going to do any dilution? Right. I'm not in this case. You know, what sort of acid am I using? Second acid type, et cetera, et cetera. And then it'll come back and it will say, okay, great. Perfect. Now tell me what your grain bill is. Okay. And so in this particular case, my grain bills are almost always stupidly simple. And so in this case, it's some pills and some wheat malt, because this was a Saison that I put together. And, you know, you just tell it, hey, you know, I'm using 10 pounds of this, 1 pound of that. And that's what the color is, right? And you can tell, say, oh, hey, you know, I'm using a crystal malt, a roast, or an acid malt, right? It's pretty simple stuff there once you got it set. And then you come in, and this is the magic. There's a lot of iterative calculations that are happening in this where stuff is sort of recursing and going back and forth. So numbers that you put in here on this screen are affected by numbers on the previous screen, and they go back and forth with each other. So here I was again making a test Saison, and I said, oh, well, you know, look, I'll use the Ashoof water profile, right? Or, you know, use your yellow full, your yellow balanced, your yellow dry, amber full, amber balanced, not amber dry. This is how I almost always do this, right? And so here's what the Ashoof water profile is. Here's my existing water profile. And then down here, I come in and I say, okay, well, what happens if I add 0.1 grams of gypsum? Now, Robert Dexter was doing a Saison yesterday. Here's where I got those numbers I was giving you, bud, because this is what I was using for mine. And you can see, adds up at the end, comes in and says, okay, how much of your water you got? So here's the total amount that you add for each of these. And if that seems a little too confusing, it gives you another screen. And this is what you work on. There you go. So you add 0.6 grams to your mash water, and you add 0.6 grams of gypsum to your sparge water. And then there should also be acid down here. Yep, 6 milliliters, 4.3 milliliters. Ta-da. If you do all that, you're pretty golden. Does that make sense? And the hardest part literally of all this is getting the water input screen dead on correct, right? Because part of the thing that you don't know is that, okay, so for instance, if you get something from Ward Labs is going to report it as SO4 here in this format. And so you got to multiply that result by 3 in order to know your proper sulfate level for calculation, right? Same thing with things like nitrates and all that. So kind of interesting. You do have to know some of your chemistry, or at least be aware of it and pay attention to. This spreadsheet is filled with all these little tabs, right? With all these little gizmos on it. So again, this is a lot of information that you have to absorb at first. I will tell you, go listen to the episode of the podcast I did, because Martin gave a lot of helpful tips there. Also, he has a lot of information on his website, more than just what's in here. Like there's even back here, there's a final tab that's all water knowledge. Everything that you'd possibly want to know that he's using to go and make this spreadsheet work, okay? This, to my mind, is some of the best $10 you can spend as a home brewer or a professional brewer. You know, Martin's a great guy, gives a lot of good information, and he does it for the cheap, okay? How we doing? Did I just make everybody go, hey? All right. I love brewing water. I will carry brewing water's water until the end of time, so to speak.
Drew, do you always use Pasadena, or do you use RO sometimes as well?
I will use RO sometimes if I'm doing something that requires it to be very pale, without any real water flavor impacts. So, like if I was trying to do a real honest to God Pilsner, then I would, right? But I'm not trying to. I don't usually try to do a real honest to God Pilsner, so I don't usually worry about it. And right now, I can't go anywhere to go get any. So, all right. So making the changes. You'll need a scale, a gram accurate scale. I think Jamil used to say you needed a scale that was good for weighing out cocaine. Because I do not like, I mean, I know that measuring by volume is easy, but it's very inaccurate. And the bonus is if you get a good scale like that, you've got better weighing of hops. Now, again, it's another expense, but it's like $35. And I've had this stupid piece of shit beaten to shit scale for 15 years, right? So I think Amber tries out to like, $2 a year for my brewing. Well, now I think I'm kind of needing to replace that because it's kind of getting grody. All right. You can, a pH meter is nice to have, but they are kind of a pain in the ass. They do require maintenance. They do require additional probes. But they are far, far, far more reliable than testing papers. Because testing papers, just like what we did here with the chlorine testing, you're doing a lot of like, hey, I got to depend upon what I can see, right? And that's not so great. So to me, if you're gonna really worry about pH, get, beg, borrow, steal a pH meter, and then once you start to figure out is if you've got your water model correct, and you've built up faith in your calculations that you get out of either Beersmith or Palmer's Water app or Brewing Water, you just can trust that you're going to hit your pHs correctly. Every time I've set things up correctly and checked it with my pH meter, they work. So
Drew, you need to mention not to use those strips. Those strips are awful. You need a real meter.
So how often do you have to calibrate your pH meter?
Well, so that's the real trick, right? So you got to make sure you store it correctly, right? And so that's got to be in the right solution for the entire time. If not, you're probably going to have to replace your probe. Although actually, I talked to the guys at Lamont because my pH meter hasn't been stored properly for a while, and I asked them, were there additional probes for it or what I could do with it, and what they told me was, well, try storing it in some pH 4 solution for a while, and that can usually actually restore its function. But yeah, if you're going to calibrate the damn thing, if you're going to go through all that trouble, you calibrate it every time, right?
Every time you use it, you calibrate it.
And it's no big deal to calibrate it.
No, it's basically, here's some pH 4 solution, here's some pH 7 solution.
Yeah.
And go clink, clink, right? I mean, it's fairly straightforward. To me, actually, the biggest issue with pH meters is just doing the storage, right? And making sure it stays safely stored.
You could get an extra bottle of the solution to put that thing in, and it stays fine. True.
Yeah, and also, by the way, all those pH solutions, they have expenses. And yeah, Travis, this is being recorded, so we'll have the recording up. But the pH meter itself, I mean, yeah, the pH testing solutions, the calibration solutions, they all have expiration dates on them. Yeah, they're usually, I think, like a year after opening. But we've been recently doing some testing, and looks like most of those good quality pH solutions hang out there for like about 2-3 years. So.
Drew, where do I get a good pH meter? Like, who makes sense?
More beer.
The one I use is actually the one that came in the Walmart kit. This is the Brew Lab Plus kit, but that's the one I use. Yeah, the problem is anytime you're dealing with anything measurement related, it's kind of hard. So is anybody out there, Nick, Drew, do you have a preferred pH meter or
Drew, Mr. Kaufman, can you mute your microphone, please?
Oh, if only.
I got him. All right. So who out there has, so I saw some, oh yeah, there we go. So Milwaukee Instruments, yeah, Milwaukee makes great stuff, and Hanna. All right, and we got Blue Lab, which I don't know, and IPRA. So you got options. Hanna is an old school trusted name. So is Milwaukee Instruments. Milwaukee Instruments is the company that makes the digital refractometer I have because I'm a nerd. So that's good fun. But yeah, to my mind, it's more important that you get the scale first, then get the pH meter. The pH meter is more expensive, and I think usually you can depend upon your calculations once you know what you're doing, right? So go find a friend who has a pH meter. Go bug John Kaufman. You know, go bug somebody. All right.
Funny, Drew. Funny.
Just trying to help you, man. All right. Blue Lab is hydroponic. Bob, I don't want to know what you're doing with hydroponics. All right. Oh, these days, I guess that doesn't matter. All right. So salts. You got 3 places to add your salts: the mash liquor, sparge water, and boil kettle. Add to the liquid, not the full mash. I've seen people do this before, and that's dumb. All your brewing salts dissolve pretty easily in water, except for the chalk. Remember the CO2 trick. If you're not doing huge chemistry changes, like you're not really trying to fight like a large amount of bicarbonate, or you're not trying to add more alkalinity, like in an extreme range, you can just go ahead and dump all the salts in the mash and ignore the sparge water. I know a lot of people who do that. I still do both because I don't find it to be any more work. And if you find recipes that are out there that are doing things like adding salts to the boil, those are all about flavor changes and not water chemistry changes, okay? Acids, you got 2 places for those: the mash liquor and the sparge water. As always, basic chemical safety applies. Add your acids to the water, not the other way around. Even though our brewing acids are relatively safe, don't be a dummy, because if you get something that isn't safe, you're going to have an ingrained habit. So always add your acid to the water, not the other way around. And even if you are doing all your salts in the mash liquor, still make sure that you acidify your sparge water, okay? And the reason for that is, I don't need a Rolls Royce for a pH meter. But yeah, we're getting from Hanna. So the reason that you want to make sure you acidify your sparge water is if you don't, you are likely to have, you're going to have a rising pH, right? Your pH is going to go more alkaline, or more basic as you're sparging. And if it goes more basic, you'll start to extract tannins, right? So, and tannins are not good. Remember, we always used to be told, don't squeeze the bag, don't squeeze your mash, don't do this, that, or you're going to extract tannins. You're not extracting tannins via mechanical action, you extract them via chemistry, okay? Last thing that you need to worry about is water, as John pointed out. There are times when you want to use water because, again, you can't pull the excess out of your own water. But you can dilute your sparge and strike waters to make sure that you reduce the excess minerality. So, like, for instance, if I wanted to reduce my bicarbonate, or I wanted to reduce my my sodium levels, right? I could use a little bit of RO water or a little distilled water and drop those levels down, right? Because you're averaging against 0. Okay. Make sure you do factor that into your water chemistry. As we showed, both Beersmith and John Palmer's and Brewing Water all have dilution calculations in there. So that's good, right? Okay. And now finally, we're coming into the home stretch, folks. But here are some examples that I've gathered from people around the club and from around the industry. So John Aitchison, we all know John Aitchison is a Pilsner guy, right? If you stick that man with an IV bag for a blood donation, you're going to get Pilsner out of him. What he does for his Pilsners is a 50-50 blend of the Owens water, right? So Owens Valley, which is basically the MWD water that we get, and 50% reverse osmosis. For his other beers, he'll do just the filtered Owens Valley water. He likes to do city profiles. I don't. He uses Beersmith to adjust. He likes carbonate in lagers for fullness, and he treats his Trappist and Flemish beers like English ales because of the town of Popering, which is in West Flanders. It's a cute little town, wonderful church, nice little hotel with a really fantastic beer cellar. but that's what John does for his beers, right? Izzy, I don't know if Izzy made it on here today. He does his 5-stage filtered water from Azusa, right? So he's about 10 miles that way from me. And he uses phosphoric acid for his mash because, again, phosphoric acid is better for adjusting mash chemistry or mash acidity. He uses lactic for the sparge. And that's a very common thing that you find with professional brewers. He uses gypsum to the boil for his hoppy beers.
Hey, Drew, can you say why?
Why what?
Why using phosphoric for mashing and lactic for sparging?
Yeah, well, because you know what? I mean, phosphoric is a very powerful acid, but it works better with malt, right? It fights the malt buffering better, or sorry, the alkalinity better. But it also will drive the pH down on sparge water way too hard. So generally, you want to use the phosphoric for that situation in the mash, so you also don't have a flavor impact. But you only have to use a relatively little amount of lactic acid in the sparge in order to do your acidification, because there is no buffering capacity in the water, right? So it's just generally like you need more acid in your mash to deal with your RA. So you want the less flavorful acid in there. So again, it's very common amongst professional brewers. Okay. All right, Bruce. Bruce is another one of our old school brewers. He, like John, he likes to do a blend of 50-50 to keep some of the salts down. He likes to also target for his lagers to keep total dissolved solids. So all that mineral content, he wants it below 100 parts per million, right? He wants tap water. He wants tap water for his stouts and porters to take advantage of the bicarbonate we have. And he actually prefers to use calcium chloride over gypsum for his calcium. Now, this also makes sense if you think about what Bruce likes to make. Bruce is not an IPA guy. He does not make a lot of big hoppy beers. He is much more traditional, and he likes a lot of more malt flavors. So the fact that he favors chloride makes perfect sense, right? And again, remember what I was saying earlier. Once you start to play around with water chemistry, once you start to understand what your water is doing and how it impacts your beer, a lot of this math goes away for a lot of people, right? Unless you're trying to be super precise all the time, a lot of this math goes away, and people just have things they like to do because they know that that's what's worked, right? So Martin, there's good old Martin from Brewing Water. I asked him what his water philosophy was, and this is what he responded with. It says to get the pH in the right range, get your sulfite and chloride into the ranges helpful for the style, but he doesn't like the ratio thing. He thinks it's useless. He tries to have at least 40 parts per million calcium in the mash, and he also favors a less is more approach. And he wants to keep the water in the background. He does not like overly mineralized beers, right? John Palmer, right? We all know and love John. John's focus is on getting that pH right first, right? Which plays into the RA. So he likes 5.2 for anything pale, 5.4 for ambers and brownish beers, and 5.6 for things that are darker like stouts. He wants a minimum of 50 parts per million of calcium, and then he looks at tweaking the chloride and sulfate for his desired effect, right? So fairly straightforward. And remember, this is John, who knows a shit ton about water chemistry, and this is what he's come up with over time for him to work. Yeah, I know. Well, again, that's the difference between John and the rest of us, right? So Nick had commented in the chat that I think a lot of brewers are happy just to hit 5.2 to 5.6. So, Craig, I was referring to Craig earlier. Craig does his pH adjustment with phosphoric, and then and this is for his IPAs. So this is the reason why I could answer the question the other day on Facebook about, hey, what did we do for the water profile for the shop brew? And so Craig does phosphoric acid, then 2 teaspoons of gypsum to the mash, which is about 8 grams, and 2 teaspoons of gypsum to the boil. Again, about 8 grams, at least according to my ad hoc on the fly measurements, right? And then finally, I'll close up with me. For many of my pale beers or amber beers where I'm not trying to drive a hop character, I literally just remove the chloramine and make sure my water hits the right pH, and then I do nothing else. I don't add calcium, I don't add sulfate, I don't add chloride, nothing. I just let them ride, because I think our profile is actually pretty good for that. For lagers, I'll do the full profiles in brewing water. So if you guys remember the Brewfest lager I brought to the 40th anniversary, and I brought it in a couple of other places, that was done with a amber full profile. For the hoppy ales, I'll tend to go for the brewing water dry. And for most anything else, I'll just kind of do a balanced addition of calcium sulfate and calcium chloride.
Hey, Drew, why do you go through the trouble of going with brew and water specifically for lagers?
Because I want to make sure I understand what the hell I got to do to my water to get it right.
Okay, I get that, but why? Like, why is it more important with lagers?
Oh, no, sorry. When I say full profiles, what I mean is, remember when we looked at the brewing water, they had yellow full, amber full, brown full, and black full. I'm using the full profile there because I want more malt usually out of a lager than I want more hop. You know, so to me, I'm trying to accentuate those malt characters, right? Because otherwise, I'm not a huge fan of IPLs. Never had very many of them that I like. You know, I love a good IPA, right? Like I'm sitting here drinking an IPA right now. I love a good IPA, but I don't really like any of the IPLs I've had. Maybe like one. But so for me, I tend to think with lagers, and particularly because they do already have a tendency to go dry because of the yeast, I want a little more oomph in the mid-body, right? All right, and then I don't ever add salts to the boil. And by the way, one thing I did actually forget to mention here. So remember we talked earlier that New England IPAs or hazy IPA styles, right? People are going to, you know, I haven't had the Integrin Hoppy Pilsner in a while, so I can't tell you. The hazy IPAs, people are always talking like, hey, you know, you want more chloride in this than sulfate, right? Because you want to boost the malt character and de-emphasize the bitter hop characters and allow more of the hop oil to come through. But what I found is that a lot of breweries where they're talking about this, like even things like the Treehouse and those guys, people have done post-analysis on the beers, and what you see is the water chemistry is all over the place. Very important thing to realize is that after the mash, after the boil, after fermentation, after packaging, all sorts of different water salts are falling out. So just because you add 300 grams of chloride into the mash doesn't mean you're getting 300 grams into the glass. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So I know that was a fire hose. Thank you for sticking with me. I want to make sure that thanks to Martin and John to making sure I was being mostly correct. And also thanks to everybody in the club who gave me inputs and saw the talk earlier so that we could get this to be something, right? So I will say again, just as an emphasis, get that pH right, get the chlorine and chloramine out, and do the least that you need to do in order to get the flavor impact that you want, okay? So that's my big advice. Make sure you follow those, and I think don't freak out. Okay. All right. Any questions?
Yeah,
Well,
one.
we should clap for a second. This was great.
Woohoo!
Good job.
I do have a question, Drew.
Okay.
Camden potassium metabisulfite, when it reacts with chloramine, breaking it down, what does it break down into?
Trying to remember, I forget the exact chemistry, but I think it basically cleaves. And maybe Oleg, can you answer? Because I think if I remember correctly, it binds up the chloramine and drops as a salt, doesn't it? Oh yeah, and Oleg, that's exactly what I was talking about, where they did Treehouse. Tonsmere and Scott, and I think it was mostly Scott, did post-fermentation chemistry analysis of Treehouse. But yeah, I think if I remember correctly, the Campton binds it into a salt and precipitates it, and essentially neutralizes it.
Yeah, I think there's also a gas that just outgasses. I'm not sure.
I was under the impression that Camden removes chlorine, but not chloramines, and you actually have to use a carbon filter to remove chloramines.
No, I mean, I've done this. I've done this for a number of years, and then I also ran that by Martin as well, and John, and they both agree. The Campton will remove the chloramine.
It's supposed to. It's supposed to.
Real quick, I saw one question come up. about the water filter machines that you see at the grocery stores. Are they reliable? Maybe.
I've tested them with TDS meters, and they're about 10 ppm of everything else. So I think it's pretty close to RO water.
I get zero.
Very reliable.
Well,
Drew, at the beginning, you talked about removing chloramines, and you gave us a chemical and where we could buy it, and I didn't write it down. Can you give it to us again?
Just look for Campden, CAMPDEN, or potassium metabisulfite. It's normally used as a wine sanitation agent, but you can either find it in tablets, or I bought this bag. There's a bag in there, or there was a bag in there. I bought this bag from More Beer like a decade ago, and I'm still working my way through it because it requires so little.
Do they sell it at the shop?
They do, absolutely. At the shop, you'll either find a little vial or a jug, like about this big. And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, there's also tablets, right?
We've got the tablets in little tiny vials. We also have, as Camden tablets, we also have powder form of just straight potassium metabisulfite.
Yeah,
that's like 1 pound bags.
And by the way, I'll remind you guys, I recommend that you use potassium metabisulfite, not sodium metabisulfite, just because sodium again is a compound that has a lot of flavor impacts. So you want to make sure that you're very careful and controlled on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Nick, and Oleg, do you guys both use RO water on most of your beers, especially your competition beers?
Yeah, I had gone to pretty much RO at least 70%. There are some times that I blend back a little bit of my city water when I'm looking for just like trace elements, but for the most part, I try to go at least 100% on most of my beers. In fact, one I actually even go to distilled water 100% just because I'm super picky about that one recipe.
Yeah, I also use RO water, and then I just build it up with salts. I'm concerned about things like sodium being too high. And
Oleg, do you use RO water also on your meads?
Yes, I do. And again, you have to buffer it with a lot of bicarbonates to make sure the pH doesn't drop too low. So I would
use on my meads I use RO, but I also put a gallon on a 5-gallon batch or 6-gallon batch. I put a gallon of high alkaline, like 9.5, in with the RO.
That's it. This is good. Yeah, actually, if you two can drop me a message and tell me what your profiles are, I'll add it to the talk because I think that's good stuff. All right. Any other questions out there about water?
Yes. So, and it's not specifically for you, Drew, it's for everybody. So a while ago, I was getting RO water from a water place called Wateria.
Yep.
And following that, I got huge chlorophenol in my beer. And so I started looking into it. I don't know if it was the water or something else that I did, but I investigated it and came across a conversation on homebrewtalk.com that said that there is, for some people, apparently evidence that there is still something in the RO water that could corrode your stainless steel material. So if you fill your hot liquor tank the night before, some people have reported getting like parts that were corroded the next morning. Has anybody experienced that or has any information about that? Because I hear very different opinions about this. And I'm like, is it bullshit or is it true?
I have a very good answer for that because somebody else asked that, and I think it was Gavin asked me that. And I ran it by Palmer because Palmer had said something about it, right? And so when I talked to Palmer last week and asked him that very question, he was like, well, yes, it can corrode parts, but it takes weeks. So if you put RO water into your kettle overnight, you're not going to have any problems. So yeah, given that I don't know everybody who's talking about on Homebrew Talk about this, but given them versus Palmer, I'm probably going to go Palmer.
Drew, RO water is cheap, but distilled water is pretty much the same price anyway. Bernard, if that's the problem you might be seeing and having, maybe go to distilled water.
Well, most of the concerns I've seen have been from people basically talking because the RO or distilled water has so little in terms of solids that it wants to leach stuff out of any surface it's in contact with. Because remember, water is one of the great solvents. Right? You know, you got water and ethanol, and they can pretty much dissolve anything between them. And so people are always concerned that water is going to leach stuff out if it doesn't have enough mineral load in it, which I don't know how the water knows it's supposed to have enough minerals, but there you are. All right, keep them coming, guys.
Quick question: does passivating your stainless steel help to protect against that?
Well, I mean, yes, but at the same time, you're talking about an effect that's going to take a lot of time. So the big, and for the most part, for most of us, I'm assuming you're not stripping your stainless every time you do your brew. I'll take my kettle down. So I brew a lot on a grandfather at home, and I'll give it an acid wash every couple months just because of the oxalate. And then I wait a little while before I do anything. Aluminum is actually the one that you always have to really worry about, but we're not using aluminum normally in our brew houses.
What are you using for an acid wash? How do you go about that? I've never done it.
If I can lie, beg, cheat, and borrow, I try and get my hands on 5 Stars acid rinse. It was briefly available for homebrewers.
Yeah, you can get it now.
Yeah, it was briefly available for homebrewers, and boy, it did a hell of a job. But otherwise, I mean, the real thing that you normally see people use, at least if you're doing it properly, is phosphoric acid, or it's basically a phosphoric acid rinse solution. I wish we could get our hands on it. I've written 5 Star in the past and said, "Can I please get some of it?" The only way I can get any of it is if I go borrow some of it from a professional brewery. A lot of times, if I'm not doing that, stainless steel will passivate with air contact.
I'm sorry. What about Barkeeper's Friend?
Oh yeah, well, Barkeeper's Friend is usually what I use to strip everything. All right, so
phosphoric acid is cheap too.
So is Barkeeper's Friend, buddy.
Yeah, which is what, nitric acid compound, isn't it? No, it's oxalic.
What is phosphoric? No.
No, it's oxalic acid.
Yeah.
But it works like.
But that'll pacify stainless steel. I pacify my stainless with that.
Yeah. The biggest thing is that no matter what, you can basically allow stainless steel. If you're not going to brew for like say a couple of days, if you strip your beer stone, right, which is the main reason why you'd have to strip on your stainless. If you strip the beer stone out of the kettle and let it sit for a couple of days, it will passivate itself, right? So that's my talk on it.
Hey, Craig Chaplin, what do you use?
To be honest, about 2 years ago, I bought a gallon of the 5 Star. So I still have that.
Okay.
Where did you find it?
I had a homebrew store order it for me when it was still available.
I miss that stuff. That stuff worked like a charm.
It is awesome.
Dude, so I was given a like a mason jar of it, and that thing dissolved the cap.
Wait, did they just put the steel cap, the metal cap on there?
Yes.
Yeah, those metal caps dissolve like nobody's business.
Sure, but that just speaks of the potency of the thing. So that's why they don't sell it to homebrewers anymore.
I know, it makes me sad. It's good shit. Well, but then again, I mean, homebrewers are idiots, including me. Oh, other questions? Quinlan asked, how long do you leave it? You have to let it dry to passivate. Yeah, I'll leave my kettles for like 4 days. But then again, usually if I'm not in the middle of a busy brewing season, that's no problem. You know?
Hey, Drew, Bernard, this has been great. Why, Drew, maybe do one on a yeast, another Zoom maybe soon on a yeast topic or something.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, but you know what my answer to that's going to be, right?
Just use 01. Now
No.
what?
No, MB.
Yes.
Oh, MB. Well, yeah. Well, why not?
She was on the Friday night Zoom.
Yeah.
Why would you want me to talk about yeast when we
Well,
have?
I'm just not necessarily you, but let's do one on yeast. It's kind of an important topic. Why
Absolutely.
not? Yeah, if MB would be so kind, that would be incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I'm totally game for it. I mean, look, I had a lot of fun doing this. I mean, this a huge surprise that I'm going to turn this into an episode of the podcast. So, but the guys will tell you I've been writing this for a couple of weeks now.
And it's really great to have a lot of the guys from QUAP participating in this. Thank you for coming on. It was great.
I love it. Well, so hey, I don't know about you guys, but I'm starved for people who aren't my wife. We've been together now for 24 days here at the house. And I love my wife, but I think she's sick of me. So what else do we have going on here? I mean, I just, like I said at the beginning, for people who are here when I just came in, I just tasted 2 of my beers out of the fermenters, my Cluster Fugget beer and my Belgian Golden Strong. And those are getting ready to go. And now I've switched over to having a beer I'm calling The Sun Also Sets in the West, which was a nice little Belgian single that I made, or actually not a Belgian single, Belgian blonde that I made to grow the yeast, right? So
bye, Nick.
There, my boys going right now.
See you, Nick.
Yep.
So great talk, Drew. Lots of great information. I was gonna say, I know that everyone's kind of hunkered down in quarantine land. I'm kind of I'm on every club, and I'm the president of Santa Fuego, which is a spice fan club. I'm going to be doing the talk on the 29th. So we have a meeting every Wednesday, the last Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. But if you would like to join us, I'm going to be doing a talk on making hot sauces and salsas and quick simple sauces up to complex lacto fermented multiple month sauces, and I've been doing that for many years. So I have that coming up, and hopefully we're going to do the cross club picnic again down in Santa Fuego or San Diego Park down there in Mission Valley, and you guys are more than welcome and invited, and I would love to have you guys out there this year. I know that we've had so many events canceled and so many beer events canceled lately, so it's going to be August 22nd potentially, and hopefully everything is good on that. But I would love to see Maltos come out, serve some beers, hang out. There's so many beers and so many clubs doing cheese and foods and beers and ciders and meads. It's a blast. It's basically we take it over. It's almost like a mini Southern California homebrewers day.
Brian,
So,
where is it, Brian? Where is it?
It's down in Mission Valley, down in San Diego. So it's kind of really central San Diego. We rent out the park. You're allowed to drink there. We go there early because the parking lot fills up and things like that. And we kind of reserve, everyone puts up a tent, pretty much an easy up and a table and some jockey box or a couple coolers of growlers. It's fine as long as the swing tops and growlers are open and dumped in the plastic cups and put back in the cooler. We've kind of done that over the years, and this is the 4th annual one. So we kind of want to bigger and badder than ever before, and that's on August 22nd. And
Is it a day thing or is it a camping thing as well?
It's just a big day.
Okay.
So most likely, there'll probably be it's going to be on a Saturday. So maybe we'll figure out a way to kind of have you guys down here and kind of host you guys and do something the next day. Maybe go out for brunch. Because a lot of us kind of will go out to brunch next day.
Cool.
That'd be great. I mean, I can't tell you, like, once all this is done with, I'm going, okay, where am I going? I love my yard. I love my little house. I love the fact that I've got this little space that I can be in. But boy, howdy, do I need to see someplace different? This is only day 24.
24 for you, a little longer for me.
Yeah, well.
Hey, Ian, can you mute your microphone, dude?
All right. Well, what else do we have? What else do we have drinking there, folks?
So, Drew, going back to pH, I know that's a heavy topic, but everything I've read up until today told me that pH was basically going to be a factor of what sort of efficiency you get. I never really thought about sparge water or anything past mash for pH before today. Can you just reiterate like what the importance of like pH on the final taste, anything past your efficiency, mash efficiency impacts?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, that's one of those things I alluded to about the fact that pH is a very easy number for us to get to because we all have meters that will read it, or we can get meters fairly cheaply. I think somebody was posting one of the Hanometers is like $35 now. So pH is one of those things people love, but it doesn't actually have a taste impact, right? I mean, or I should say, there's no clear way to go from pH to taste, right? So that's where the titratable acidity comes in. But in general, yes, I mean, the lower the pH, the more sour you'll get. You really don't want your mash. I'm trying to think. So if you take, like, for instance, if you take your mash to, say, 5.1, as opposed to, say, 5.2, 5.3, 5.6 area, what you start to do is you start to favor the some different enzymes there in the mash. So in that particular case, 5.1 favors proteolytic enzymes. And so that will start to break down the proteins in the head and all that sort of good shit in your beer. So that would have an impact that you would see. But below 5.1, you'll start to get, say, fermentation characteristic changes. So yeah, you really want to avoid those. Which is the reason why things like kettle sours. I love the idea of kettle sours. It's a fantastic notion, but man, are they really hard to pull off in any sort of way that tastes good, right? Does that help? Okay. And Bernard, what is that more your? That's not more your Vienna.
What's that?
I said that's not more your Vienna, is it?
I'm sorry. Well, I don't understand what you're asking.
What's in your glass?
Oh, no. No, I brewed the Vienna lager yesterday. So no, what's in my glass is actually Luponic Distortion from Firestone, the latest one. It's all right. I mean, I think I preferred the 14th edition better, but it's all right. I'll drink it.
Yeah. Craig's glass was probably full of triple IPA, I'm guessing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, 2 of those and you got to slow down.
Yeah, we can tell.
I gotta take off, but thank you so much and awesome seeing everyone. So goodbye.
Bye, Brian.
Thank you, Brian, for joining. I appreciate it.
Anybody has any other question for Drew?
About life?
I've got a quick question about exposure, mash exposure to copper for short term, say for your typical, 1 hour mash or hour and a half mash tops. Any big problems with that?
Depends on how much you want to believe the guys who are behind Lodo.
Okay.
So the Lodo folks will talk about that. So Lodo is low dissolved oxygen brewing, and it's a whole series of techniques, different things like adding metabisulfite to the mash to reduce oxidative reactions. Talking about avoiding any copper, right? A lot of different things that they talk about. Those guys are big into the idea that copper promotes micro-oxidative damage and therefore damages malt characteristic. So their big thing is because they want to be, they want to have these like German lagers that they want to taste. They're really concerned that they don't get the malt character in a German lager that they think they should. So they're doing everything they can to minimize damage. So they're even talking about things like wort shear in the boil in order to do it. So, I mean, some of these guys are absolutely bananas with it. And yeah, copper is one of them. I mean, at least when I was coming up as a brewer. Bye, John.
Bye, everybody.
But
Bye,
when I was
John.
coming up as a brewer, I was always taught at least that a little bit of copper was actually not a bad thing for the beer and the yeast health and everything else. So yeah, I know the Lodo guys are really super down on the idea of copper anywhere in the brew house. But then again, you go to Germany and you see massive breweries that have giant copper kettles and mash tuns.
Right. Well, I mean, in my setup, I've got sort of a heated mash system. I've got a copper coil for the mash tun, and then when I'm boiling, I just leave my copper immersion chiller in there. I mean, I've never seen anything huge, but I guess I just wanted to know if there was any thoughts on maybe any particular styles. It's like, no, you shouldn't. You really should avoid that. Or is it that small, that small a contact that it really makes that much difference?
Well, again, like I said, with the Lodo folks, they'll tell you that anything German-based, anything that you want real malt character from, you should avoid all contact with copper.
Okay.
I'm a little iffy on the science of it all. Some of it comes off more to me as like religious zealotry, particularly because they will tell you if you don't follow their process to the T, then you're fucked.
Yeah.
And while I agree that, while I think there are some good impacts from the techniques that they're talking about, I don't buy the whole cult of. So yeah, again, I think the only places I've ever seen anybody question anything is in terms of big malty beers. But again, I look at those breweries in Germany, and I go,
yeah, right, big giant kettles. That's about as much contact as you can possibly get. Most surface area.
Well, and does anybody doubt that, like, say, Anchor, their beer has a good malt character to it?
Yeah.
Or some of the beers do. And we've all been to Anchor. We've seen those damn brew kettles. Those things are beautiful.
All right. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Any other question for Drew? Well, I guess that concludes it. So, Drew, I wanted to say thank you very much for this. This was outstanding. And yeah, exactly. And I don't know about you guys, but having a meeting like this, it's weird. But for me, it brings a little bit of normalcy into this super weird situation. I cannot tell you how happy I am to see all of you and that you guys came over and, willing to share whatever, if you're drinking or your techniques or whatever. This means a lot to me and to the rest of the club. Keeps the club alive. I love it. And so final remarks, I'm going to say